A four-star general stepped into the elevator, not even glancing at the janitor in the corner. As the janitor moved to enter, the general barked, "How dare you board the same elevator as me, insolent man." Without a word, the janitor stepped inside anyway. When they were alone, the general noticed the scars on the old man's arms. His hands trembled as he was transported 40 years back, to a helicopter engulfed in flames, to 12 soldiers abandoned to die, and to the hands that pulled them out. "What happened to your hands?" the general asked. The janitor began to speak. The elevator stopped, but the story was only beginning. The corridors of Walter Reed National Military Medical Center were always the same. Sterile smells, hurried footsteps, white coats, and star-studded uniforms. Everyone here moved with purpose. Doctors saved lives, generals made strategies, nurses healed. And Harold Miller, he just cleaned. At 69, Harold was the hospital's invisible man. He started at 6 a.m., finished at p.m. No one looked at him. No one knew his name. They just called him the janitor. It didn't bother him. Harold preferred the silence. He avoided noise, attention, questions, because he was here to be forgotten. That morning began like every other. He'd mopped the third-floor hallways, emptied trash bins outside patient rooms, wiped dust from windowsills. His hands trembled sometimes. Not from age. Never from age. At 2:30 p.m., he arrived at the elevator lobby. In his hands, a plastic cleaning bucket. Over his shoulder, a damp rag. He stood before the elevator and pressed the button. Before the doors opened, heavy military boots echoed behind him. He turned. What he saw didn't faze Harold. A four-star general, chest covered in medals, silver stars gleaming on his shoulders. Mid-50s, imposing, arrogant. Behind him, two young aides clutching notepads, walking in quick step. General Thomas Harrington. Harold didn't know the name, but the rank was enough. The general's eyes landed on Harold and slid right off, as if he weren't there, as if he were furniture. The elevator doors opened. The general stepped in. The aides followed immediately. Harold took a step forward. "Stop," the general spoke without even raising his head. His voice was sharp, commanding. "How dare you board the same elevator as me, insolent man?" One of the aides smirked. The other didn't even look up from his notepad. Harold stopped. His bucket touched the floor. Not a flicker. Crossed his face. All he did was bow his head slightly and wait. The general pressed a button on the interior panel. The doors began to close. But just then, Harold took another step and entered. The general's brows furrowed. "I heard you," Harold said, his voice emerging for the first time. Calm, low, raspy. "But the next elevator won't come for 10 minutes. If you'll permit me, I'll stand quietly in the corner." The general looked at him, but he didn't really look. His eyes scanned, old, worn, hunched shoulders, worthless. "Then stay quiet." The doors closed. Inside, there were only 3 people, General Harrington, Harold Miller, and 1 aide. The other aide had remained outside. The elevator began its slow ascent. The silence was heavy. The general's eyes were locked on the digital floor numbers ahead. The aide stared at his phone. Harold stood in the corner, bucket in hand, head bowed. 5th floor, 6th floor. The general scratched the back of his neck. Then he adjusted his jacket collar. His eyes reflexively shifted to the mirror. But what he saw in the reflection wasn't himself. It was Harold's hands. Hands. The general froze. Harold's arms were bare. Beneath his short-sleeved work shirt, his wrists, forearms, and even parts of his upper arms were visible. And they were covered in scars. Not surgical scars. Not accident scars. Burn scars. Deep, mottled tissue. Patches of discolored skin, rough like tree bark. The kind of burns that came from flames so hot they melted flesh to bone. The scars ran in uneven patterns, some clustered, some spreading like lightning. They weren't hidden. They weren't treated with cosmetic care. They just were. The general's breath caught. He knew burns like that. He'd seen them before. On men pulled from crashed helicopters. On pilots trapped in burning cockpits. On soldiers who'd stayed too long in the inferno trying to save their brothers. His mind, against his will, began to drift. The sterile metal walls of the elevator seemed to warp and fade. The hum of the machinery became the roar of rotor blades. And suddenly, he wasn't a four-star general anymore. He was a 23-year-old lieutenant screaming into a radio, Lieutenant Thomas Harrington's voice cracked over the static. Mayday, mayday. This is Echo 7 Nina, we are going down. I repeat, we are going down. The Huey helicopter shuddered violently as black smoke poured from the engine. The instrument panel sparked and died. Below, the jungle. Canopy rushed up like a green fist ready to crush them. Brace! Brace! The pilot shouted. The impact was catastrophic. Metal screamed. Bodies slammed against restraints. The world flipped sideways. And then, fire! The fuel line ruptured, spilling burning liquid across the cabin floor. Get out! Get out! Someone screamed, but the doors were jammed. The side hatch was crushed inward. Flames licked up the walls. 12 men trapped. Smoke filled the cabin, choking, blinding. Thomas tried to move, but his leg was pinned under a fallen seat. Pain shot through him like a hot knife. He looked around wildly. Men were clawing at the doors. Others were passed out. One was screaming, his uniform on fire. We're going to die, someone whispered. Command's voice crackled through someone's still functioning headset. Cold, clinical, final. Echo 7 Nina, your position is too hot. No rescue assets available. You are on your own. Godspeed. They had been abandoned. Thomas felt the heat intensifying. His skin blistered. His lungs burned with every breath. This was it. This was how it ended. 23 years old, dying in a burning metal coffin in a jungle that didn't even know his name. And then, the sound. Metal shrieking. Not from inside. From outside. The crushed side hatch was being torn open. Not with tools. With bare hands. Through the smoke, a figure appeared. Silhouetted against the flames. No uniform. No rank. Just a man. His hands wrapped in torn cloth. His face covered with a wet rag. He didn't speak. He just moved. He grabbed the nearest soldier and dragged him out. Then another. Then another. He moved like a machine, tireless, relentless. When the flames surged and blocked his path, he didn't retreat. He plunged his hands into the fire, pushed burning debris aside, and kept going. Thomas watched, half conscious, as this man worked. The cloth on his hands was burning now. The skin beneath was blistering. But he didn't stop. When he reached Thomas, their eyes met. The man's eyes were calm. Impossibly calm. You're coming with me, Lieutenant. He ripped the seat off Thomas's leg with a strength that seemed inhuman. Then he hauled Thomas up and over his shoulder. The pain was blinding. Thomas screamed. But the man didn't slow down. One by one, he pulled them all out. 12 men. Some walking, some dragged, some carried. By the time the last man was clear, the helicopter exploded, a roaring fireball that lit up the jungle night. The man collapsed to his knees. His hands. God, his hands. The flesh was charred black in places, raw red in others. Blood mixed with melted cloth. He didn't cry out. He just breathed. Slow. Steady. Thomas crawled to him. Who are you? The man looked at him. Just someone passing through, Lieutenant. What's your name? Doesn't matter. It matters to me. The man smiled faintly. Then call me Miller. Medics arrived minutes later. The man refused treatment. By the time Thomas was loaded onto a rescue bird, Miller was gone. Vanished into the jungle like a ghost. Thomas never saw him again. Until now, the elevator chimed. 7th floor. General Harrington blinked. The memory shattered. He was back in the present. The sterile smell, the fluorescent lights, the soft hum of the elevator. But his eyes were still locked on the scars. His voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. What happened to your hands? Harold looked up slowly. His eyes met the general's. For the first time, there was something in them. Not pride, not anger, just weariness. A fire, Harold said simply. Long time ago. The general's throat was dry. Where? Vietnam. 1983. The world tilted. The aide glanced up, confused. The general didn't notice. His entire focus was on the old man in the corner. His mind was racing, calculating, remembering. The timeline matched. The scars matched. The voice. Older now, but the calmness, that unshakable calm, it was the same. You, the general's voice cracked. You pulled men from a helicopter. Harold didn't respond immediately. He just looked at the general. Really looked. And then, slowly, recognition dawned on his own face. Lieutenant Harrington, Harold said softly. The elevator was silent. The aide was frozen, his phone forgotten. The general took a step forward. His hands were shaking. You? You saved us, all 12 of us. They told me you disappeared. They said you were a ghost. I looked for you. For years, I looked for you." Harold shook his head. "You weren't supposed to find me." "Why?" "Because I didn't want to be found." The elevator chimed again. 8th floor. The doors opened, but no one moved. The general's voice was thick with emotion. You're a hero. You deserve recognition. Medals, honor." Harold smiled sadly. "I don't want medals, General. I wanted peace. You're cleaning floors. You should be. I'm exactly where I need to be." The general stared at him. Disbelief, gratitude, shame, or every emotion crashed through him at once. He had just called this man insolent. He had dismissed him as worthless. This man who had run into a burning helicopter while command ordered them abandoned. This man who had sacrificed his hands, his identity, his life, so that 12 strangers could go home. The aide finally found his voice. "Sir, should I get Colonel Reese?" the general said, his voice suddenly steel. "Now." The aide hesitated. "Sir, your meeting, cancel it. Get Reese. Tell him." "Code Phoenix." The aide's eyes widened. Code Phoenix was a protocol reserved for the highest level military matters. Without another word, he bolted from the elevator. The doors tried to close. The general shoved his hand in the way, stopping them. He turned back to Harold. "You may not want medals, but the men you saved deserve to know you're alive. I deserve to thank you properly. Will you? Will you give me that?" Harold looked at him for a long moment. Then slowly, he nodded. "Just this." Once, within 30 minutes, the 8th floor conference room was filled, not with planned attendees, but with men the general had summoned. Colonel Marcus Reese arrived first, a grizzled veteran with silver hair and a chest full of ribbons. Behind him came Major David Ko, then Captain Luis Mendoza, then Sergeant First Class Jerome Williams. All of them had one thing in common. They had been on Echo 7 Nina. They had been in that helicopter. They filed into the room, confused, uncertain. The general stood at the head of the table, and beside him, still in his janitor's uniform, was Harold Miller. At first, none of them recognized him. 40 years had passed. The man who had pulled them from the flames had been younger, stronger, his face not yet lined with age. But then Colonel Reese saw the hands. He froze. "No," he whispered. "It can't be." Major Ko looked. His face went pale. "Miller," Captain Mendoza breathed. Sergeant Williams dropped into a chair, his legs giving out. "Oh my God." Harold stood quietly, his hands at his sides. He didn't speak. General Harrington's voice was steady, but emotion cracked at the edges. "Gentlemen, I want you to meet the man who saved our lives. The man we've been searching for." The man command listed as a ghost. Colonel Reese walked forward slowly, as if approaching something holy. We thought you were dead, or classified, or something. We tried to find you." "I know," Harold said simply. "I made sure you couldn't." "Why?" Major Ko's voice was raw. "Why would you hide?" Harold looked at them. These men, now decorated officers, who had gone on to build careers, raise families, led soldiers. Men who lived because of what he'd done. "Because I didn't do it for glory," Harold said quietly. "I did it because it was right. And when it was over, I didn't want to be the man who saved you. I just wanted to be a man." Sergeant Williams stood, tears streaming down his face. He walked to Harold and did something that broke every protocol, every rule of military bearing. He hugged him. "Thank you," Williams whispered, his voice breaking. "Thank you for my life. Thank you for my kids. Thank you for every sunrise I've seen because of you." One by one, the others followed. Hardened combat veterans, men who had seen was worst, stood in a sterile conference room and wept. General Harrington watched, his own eyes wet. When the moment passed, he cleared his throat. "Mr. Miller, whether you want it or not, what you did will be recorded. Officially, I'm recommending you for the Soldier's Medal." Retroactively, Harold shook his head. "I wasn't even Army, General. I was contracted civilian support, medic attachment, then the Secretary of Defense Civilian Service Medal, the highest honor we can give." I know you don't want it," the general said firmly. "But the men in this room do. We need the world to know. Not for you. For every person who thinks heroism needs a rank or a uniform." Harold looked at the faces around him, men whose lives had intertwined with his for mere minutes, but whose debt would last lifetimes. Finally, he nodded. "All right, just once." the story didn't stay contained. By that evening, word had spread through Walter Reed like wildfire. The janitor on the third floor wasn't just a janitor. He was a living legend. Soldiers who had passed him in the halls now stopped and saluted. Nurses who had never noticed him brought him coffee. Doctors who had dismissed him as invisible now knew his name. But Harold didn't change. He still came in at AM, still mopped floors, still emptied trash. The difference was the respect. A week later, in a small, private ceremony attended only by the survivors of Echo 7 Nina and a handful of top brass, Harold Miller was presented with the Secretary of Defense Medal for Valor. He accepted it quietly. When they asked him to speak, he said only this: "I did what anyone should do. I saw people who needed help, and I helped them. That's not heroism. That's humanity." After the ceremony, General Harrington pulled him aside. "I owe you an apology," the general said. "For the elevator. For my words. For not seeing you." Harold smiled faintly. "General, you saw what you were trained to see. Rank, order, hierarchy. That's not wrong. It's just incomplete." "What do you mean?" "The measure of a man isn't in his stars or his medals," Harold said. "It's in what he does when no one's watching. When there's no reward. When it would be easier to walk away." The general nodded slowly. "I'll remember that." "Good," Harold said, "because the next time you step into an elevator, there might be another invisible man in the corner, and he might be the one who saves your life." Months later, General Harrington stood before a room of new officer candidates at West Point. His speech was about leadership, about honor, about duty, but he ended with a story. "There's a janitor at Walter Reed," he began. "Most of you will never meet him. If you pass him in the hall, you probably won't even notice him. But 40 years ago, that man did something that no amount of training or rank could command. He told them about the helicopter, the fire, the 12 men, the hands. I called him insolent," the general said, his voice thick with shame. "I told him he wasn't worthy to share an elevator with me. And the entire time, I was standing next to a man who embodied everything I claimed to represent." The room was silent. "So here's my lesson to you," the general continued. "Never confuse rank with worth. Never confuse a uniform with honor. The greatest warrior you ever meet might be the person you'd least expect. And if you're too blind to see them, that's not their failure. It's yours." The cadet sat motionless, absorbing every word. "Respect isn't something you demand," the general finished. "It's something you earn. And sometimes the people who deserve it most are the ones who never ask for it."